I haven't seen anything to indicate that just because you have a name like Blackfoot, that you are somehow descended from the original people of the Americas. Cherokee owned African slaves. A lot of people don't know that. We talk about a lot of times that we had a harmonious relationship with Native Americans, but it wasn't always like that. Some Native Americans actually were slave owners. The group of Native Americans that I have the most respect for are the Seminoles, because in Florida, people call Seminoles and the descendants of enslaved Africans fought together. And we even know the names of some of them. There's a brother named John Horse. There's a Native American hero named Wildcat, who was very much a champion of African people. There are people like Osceola. But I haven't seen any indication that these Native American groups, which we are claiming relationships with, are really the descendants of the first people in the Americas. In other words, to make a long story short, I think this Aboriginal thing is nonsense. I think it's anti-African. I think it's destructive to our community, and it should be nipped in the bud. And anybody who engaged in any kind of critical thinking wouldn't have any difficulty finding the fallacy of it. As a matter of fact, I even question whether it's an African thing. I think that you have white supremacist organizations that plant these seeds, even give false African identities to further split the African community. I'm a Pan-Africanist. I believe in the global unity of African people, and anything that attempts to sabotage that, I'm opposed to. And so this Aboriginal indigenous nonsense, which is just that, to me is one of the worst things that's happened to our community in a very long time, and it needs to be called as such. Much of it, I think, stems from an anti-Africanism. I think that there are people in our community who would rather be called turds in the toilet than an African. I do believe that, because we've been taught to be so ashamed of Africa. And so I think that feeds this Aboriginal indigenous nonsense. And I think a lot of it is the result of a lack of critical thinking, and that people confuse the first arrivals with indigenous. People of African heritage were the first people to settle the Western Hemisphere, the Western world. But there's a very different, it's very different to say that we were the first to come here than to say that we are the direct descendants of those original African people. And that's the problem.